presentation today. For those who have seen me present before, I'm on my soapbox about bias, and so there's some things that you may see before my flowers. I use my flowers in every presentation about bias, so we'll talk about that. But have a kind of a different lens today as we talk about sustainability. So if you've seen it before, just nod your head. If you heard the joke before, just laugh at it anyways, and then we'll get through it together. But just really have a conversation around how implicit bias, what it is, and how it affects even our interaction with sustainability and the efforts of sustainability and how they actually intersect. Sustainability, the three-legged stool, people, profit, planet, intersects with equity and diversity. And so I don't have all the answers, but just have some knowledge that I want to share with you today as we work through the slides. And then by all means, questions, comments, dialogue, let's have that towards the end of the discussion. So without further ado, we'll jump right in. Let's see here, get the technology working. So we're going to talk about some basic understanding what diversity is, equity and inclusion is, what is implicit bias, and then we'll talk about the intersections. And then we'll talk about strategies that we can do to address bias and sustainability. And then we'll have the Q&A at the end. And so she's already read my bio, about me. Everybody knows that I also have a lot of kids. I got 4 boys and 1 girl, 5 total. So my life is chaotic everywhere I go. So diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Diversity, you'll be amazed at who doesn't know basic definitions, right? And we all have various definitions of different things. So I always do kind of a basic terminology understanding. Diversity is the differences among us, human difference, which can be based on different categories. Inclusion is the involvement and empowerment, having a seat at the table, if you will, based on our diversity and leveraging that for the greater good of the organization. And then the equity and equality conversation, right? Equal, everybody gets the same. Equity is based on giving them what they need to be successful where they're at. With equitable teaching, equitable access, equitable success. That is what we mean by that. And we want equity versus equality, because equality doesn't always take into account who I am and my background. And that is why equity is important. And so I always love this graphic, kind of breaks it down. So equality, everybody gets the same box, right? Equity is based on where we're at. And then justice, we talk about remove all the barriers so that everybody, no matter where they start from, has an equal opportunity. And then I'm going to show you how this works as we talk about sustainability as we get towards the end here. But I wanted to lay this foundation first of kind of the equity and the diversity conversation so we can then add on the lens of sustainability here in a second. So historically, where do we come from, right? So the 60s was civil rights, 70s was affirmative action, the 80s was respecting diversity, 90s was diversity management, the 2000s, right? So now we have shifted into, we have a business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're a global society now. And now sustainability includes, when you talk about the UN's 17 sustainable focuses, the UN talks explicitly about poverty, about justice. So now diversity, equity, and inclusion is not just siloed, it intersects with social justice, sustainability, in the different social areas of our society, right? Education, banking, housing, it intersects. Likewise, with sustainability, it's not just the green stuff. It intersects with social justice, the economy, housing, planning, urban development. And so it's not just siloed anymore. It's intersectional and it goes across several different industries and lanes. So what is bias? Again, basic definition, you may already know this, but I have to assume that not everybody knows this because we have various definitions. Conscious and unconscious, right? And so when I prefer something, that's a preference. But when I don't prefer it, and then I may act negatively towards it, that is a bias towards something. And so I'll show you with my flowers and my bugs here how that works. It's influenced by past experiences with individuals, past experiences with circumstances or situations. It's exposure, right? And what we've been exposed to over the course of our lives. And then when we talk about sustainability, our exposure to different things of the society environment, right? Societal environmental factors, right? Was I raised in a house that had a gas stove versus electric, right? The conversation is even more prevalent now when we talk about the Texas power grid, how we're the only state that's not on the national power grid. And why do we do that? And we talk about the economics of it, right? And the economics of it is that we had free choice in the market, the capitalization, so we could choose our provider. But look how that worked out, right? And I'm from Oklahoma, where there's only one individual company that provides service. And so, again, when you think about these things, those influence our interaction and creates a bias towards, and we had gas in my home growing up. We lived out in the country, so we were on well water. So city water, I don't trust anyways, right? Because well water has a distinct taste. And so these things create bias or preference, whether you know it or not. And so we think of bias, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Don't be so limited that it's just race, class, and gender. Sustainability has a key component of diversity, equity, inclusion, and bias in it as well. And we'll dig more into that. So now I want to see, and everybody knows that I'm an advocate of blind spot. I keep copies on deck. I'm a champion of it. I don't get any cutback from promoting it, but it just does a great job of breaking down how the brain thinks in terms of bias and how we're hardwired to prefer or to be biased towards something. If you haven't taken the test, it's very popular now, but go Google the test and see how you're biased towards one thing or prefer another. So here's my beloved flowers and bugs on how I teach bias. You see the flowers, right? And those who've been through my trainings, we talk about how the flowers make us feel because of an experience, right? You know, the roses, red roses mean love. White roses mean peace. We have an experience with these roses. So when you see it, it creates an instant emotion. And the research says within 7 seconds, you determine how you're going to treat a person or a situation or an object, right? Within 7 seconds. And it's conscious or unconscious because the unconscious piece, implicit piece, it's happening in the background. And so you don't even know your reaction to the flower within those 7 seconds because it's either conscious or unconscious. And so when you see the flowers, it creates an emotion or based on the experience you've had with it. Likewise, with my bugs, when you see it, there's a natural reaction, right? Ill, gross. We see them in the house, kill them, right? We've been conditioned based on our experience to treat bugs a certain way. So we're talking about bias. So now, what if we flip it? And so now I don't necessarily have the same experience as you because I think of the white carnation here, or white roses, were at my grandmother's funeral. And so it takes me back to an experience that was not so pleasant. So now what is happy for you is sad for me. And so now I have a bias, you have a preference. And so we treat it differently based on our experience, based on our exposure. And so now we have bias at play, preference at play in our interactions. Likewise with my bugs, right? So full disclaimer, full disclosure, these are gross and nasty, right? But think about, I talked about my sister who's studying to be a veterinarian who loves these things, right? She loves and sees the beauty in these insects. And so she has a different reaction than I would. And so that's because her exposure, that's because of her experience. And so now we begin to treat things differently based on our experience, based on our exposure. So we'll go through a few of these. So I hear they handle well. I don't have anyone. I got 5 kids, and I'm a broke educator, right? The worst profession to be in with multiple kids. But I hear they handle well, right? We all have a bias, one way or the other. We all have a bias based on our geographic location, how we were raised, right? Whether you're from Detroit, you're Detroit Lions fans, Kansas City Chiefs fans, Dallas fans, America's team. They are loyal. They will support a team and love a team, even though they can't win a game at all. But geographic location dictates how biased we are towards one thing or another. And that'll make more sense here when we talk about sustainability. Think in terms of West Virginia coal country, those who are around coal versus renewable sources, right? How I'm biased towards one or the other based on my geographic location. Bias is everywhere. iPhone, if you don't have an iPhone, you don't have an iPhone, right? iMessage is a godsend. I want to be able to plug my the iCloud. I will never use an Android, right? Android users that I talk to, pray for them, but they will never use iPhones, right? But we all have a bias or a preference. It exists. Mac or PC. Mac, I loathe Macs because you have to have an extra piece or attachment just to get a PowerPoint to work or get it to present on the screen. PC, just plug and play, right? We all have a bias or a preference. And I always throw this one in there because I am sooner born, sooner bred, and when I die, I'll be sooner dead. I love my beloved. There's a weekend in October every year that I loathe the UT Austin Longhorns. They're a great school, great colleagues who go there or work there, but we're biased. And so geographic location in our environment conditions us to be biased towards something. When I taught at OU, when I was a student at OU, it's ingrained in us to hate Texas. And so it's problematic for a guy who moves to Texas, right, has OU tags, and who's trying to merge on to the Dallas North Tollway every day to go to work, and nobody would let me on. And I figured out it's because my OU tags, right? But our environment conditions us towards bias towards something. And so when you think about Prius, like, green cars, hybrids, those of us who come from, the Bible Belt and, the blue collar workers who worked in the GM factories, my aunts and uncles worked in GM factories who, were all about gasoline vehicles and GM trucks. When we talk about green, how the notion is that it will replace jobs, but how I'm biased towards it, right? Because the environment, because I was raised in an environment of blue collar workers who worked in the factory, who made really good money without necessarily good higher education degrees, working in the GM plants producing big gas guzzlers. And so when I hear Prius or green car, there's a bias towards that because of what it means for my family, right? And so again, when you hear bias, don't just think race, class, and gender, think sustainability as well. So now we get to, so that's, again, we do some diversity terminology, so we're all on the same page. We talk about bias. We all have bias. Look beyond just the lens of race, racial bias, gender bias, religious bias, right? Now let's talk about sustainability bias. How does it show up? So when we talk about bias, and George Ann has done a great job of educating us on kind of the three-legged stool, right? The environment, the economy, equity, community, right? And so it kind of breaks it down. So economy, good paying jobs, right? Profitable, infrastructure, the capitalism, like fair trade, the economy, right? Environment, the reduce, the reuse, the recycle, right? Conservation, that's the environment piece. And then the community, the equity lens, right? Good working conditions, healthcare, education, access, and success. That's kind of the food chain, right? Of sustainability, the three-legged stool. Now that you've heard about bias and diversity, equity, inclusion, now I want you to put the sustainability lens on top of that. See how they intersect? I could make a case for equity in the economy, right? I can make a case for equity in the environment. I can make a case for equity in the community, social sustainability. It's all interconnected, which is the beauty of the social responsibility office under leadership of Ms. Marisol Romney, is that it all goes together, right? What George Ann preaches of sustainability, I'm right beside her preaching equity, right? What I preach equity, she's right beside me preaching sustainability. And then we also add in supplier diversity. It all makes sense because it's married together. You cannot have one without the other, in my argument. It simply will not work. So we all have bias. So if you drive 35 north, going back to my hometown of Dale City, Oklahoma, you'll see wind turbines just past Ardmore, right? Wind energy. And you've heard in the news this week the argument that, the wind turbines froze up, which is part of the reason why we didn't get the energy that we needed. Yeah, that might be true, but also the old coal plants weren't renovarized either, right? And this isn't a political statement, right? But so there's bias towards one or the other. I used to work at an institution that had the wind turbine management degree, where, working on the wind turbines, right? It created jobs in the field. It creates energy. University of Oklahoma is 70% fueled by wind energy, and they're trying to get to 100% renewable, fueling the stadium on game days, fueling the buildings on classroom days, renewable energy 100%, and they're working towards that. And so, again, we all have a bias towards one or the other based on our exposure, based on our environment, based on our experience. So, we have the blue can in my yard and the black can, right? The black can is trash. The blue can is recyclable. And it never fails on Monday when I drive through the alley, I'll see trash in the blue can because people didn't take the time to separate it out. And I'm like, one, it's been provided as a resource, and all you have to do is and it tells you what to put in it, but people have a bias, right? People have a preference. And sometimes people just aren't educated enough to put their glass and their plastic and their cardboard in the blue bin, and they just put it all in both bins, thinking that they have two truly trash bins. Now, I'm thankful that when it goes for cleaning up, that they separate it out. But think of how much extra work that creates when all we have to do is put a piece of plastic in the right bin. And so reduce, reuse, recycle. And, we all have biases. Sometimes when you hear those words, you'll hear terminology like, liberal or, that the new Green Deal. And those things are politicized terms. But just because I'm trying to take care of the environment doesn't make me a liberal. It just makes me someone who's more conscious, because here's the deal. If we don't have a planet, we don't have an economy. We don't have social justice. We don't have trash to throw away if we don't have a planet. And so we only get one of them, right? And so that's why we need to be mindful of what to recycle, what to reuse, and what to reduce. But we all have bias, right? Solar panels, right? I have some neighbors who have solar panels, right? And they didn't have issues last week because they had solar energy stored up to fuel their house. Again, it makes sense in the times of chaos, right? But again, we all have bias. And there's a cost associated with this as well, too. But again, what I want you to see is the bias and the preference, again, beyond just race, class, and gender, but also in sustainability. And then the good old coal plant, right? How the good old energy, which has its place in our history, right? This is how we fueled transportation with the locomotive steam engines and the trains to get for the westward expansion, right? It has its place in our history. But there are new opportunities now for us to leverage more than ever, given last week, right? For us to leverage one to heat and cool our houses, to provide safe spaces for individuals, but also to create jobs. And so again, it's all interconnected. It's all interconnected. So again, now you understand how bias shows up with the three-legged stool: people, profits, planet. Again, same model: social, economic, environment. But now I want you to take that lens a little bit further and put on how it shows up in our day-to-day interactions, right? And so when we intertwine this, when you see the graphic here, social and environment, is it bearable? Is it equitable? Because it's social and economic and social environment. Is it viable, right? And so all these things are at play. And so now we have to have a conversation about this when we do our daily interactions and operations. So we'll go through that together. Hopefully that makes more sense. I'm a visual learner, so this helped me understand what I'm about to talk about next. So now we talk about implicit bias, and we talk about sustainability, three-pillar in the social aspect. We talk about housing, affordable housing, right? Sidewalks, trees planted, things of that nature. So when we talk about implicit bias, we talk about redlining, right? How there are certain banks from early on who would only fund certain houses in certain neighborhoods, or they would encourage certain minorities to move into certain areas of town, right? It's no mistake how the Trinity River divides North Dallas and South Dallas. That was intentional, right? South Dallas is more minority focused. You see less investment right in South Dallas. North Dallas, when you get to Plano, Richardson, it's not a mistake. And if you look at the Trinity River divide, you'll kind of see the economics and the socio-economics of that divide, right? That's because implicit bias was involved in kind of building out neighborhoods, right? And so now we have to be intentional with the city of Dallas in our city planning and urban development, right? And urban planning to make sure, one, we're sustainable, but two, we're addressing bias in our housing and make sure that's sustainable. That we don't just plant houses and build houses, but that we plant trees, we build sidewalks, right? And we create opportunities for the environment to thrive, for economic when we talk about economics, home ownership, right? The pathway to wealth for minorities and other populations, but also social. Are we creating areas that are safe and that have opportunities for parks and for individuals to ride bikes and things of that nature? I hope you see the intersections now. So that's in housing, right? Again, social sustainability, intersection implicit bias, employment, right? Do we create jobs? When we talk about green jobs, right? Wind energy, is it creating jobs? Yes, there may be a reduction in coal jobs and in the old forms of gas and fossil fuels, but are we creating opportunities to use that same skill set? So as an educational institution as Dallas College, do we offer a renewable energy degree, right? That is the latest and greatest. Do we offer transition skills for those looking for certificates and things of that nature who may lose jobs? Because again, we want to be sure that we are addressing the needs of the three-legged pillar, people, profits, and planet. A great example of this is, so dual credit student comes in, gets a degree, electrician degree, and we talk about building energy efficient buildings. So they get an electrician degree, dual credit student from an inner city school, goes to Dallas College, gets an electrician certificate or degree, graduates, comes back and does a supplier diversity bid to help build the new buildings that we're going to build. And they're going to do energy efficient lighting in the building. That's the way sustainability and diversity, equity, inclusion, and supplier diversity works as an intersectional and as a marriage. We've addressed the need of a minority community by educating. We've equipped them with a degree. Now they're a business owner, they're an electrician, so the economy has changed for them. They can become a homeowner, they can lift themselves out of poverty with their degree. Now they're doing business with Dallas College, right? Not only as an alum, but now they're a minority business owned, and they're energy efficient and plug energy lighting. So now we're addressing the environment, right? And so that's the cycle that we view our office out of, because now we've hit all three parts of the stool, right? The three-legged stool, the social, economic, and environmental. And that's how we address it through employment. But again, I want you to see the intersections, how they intersect. Criminal justice, right? This kind of goes without saying, given our country's challenges last summer with George Floyd, and now, again, implicit bias is there, but criminal justice. The more people we put in prison, the more prisons we have to build, the more land that we take up, the more fuel cost for transporting prisons, right? And these are things that we don't think about. The more food cost, right? These are the things that lighting cost, heating cost, the amount of money that it costs to keep a person in prison for crimes that are not necessarily as violent. You know, these are conversations that intersect with sustainability. And so we got to keep these things in mind. Education, right? And so not only in the form of segregation, Brown versus Board of Education, not only when we talk about discipline of minority students, but also curricular. Are we, we talk, Northlake, we had, our SAGE degrees where we're ingraining, the sustainability conversation into the curriculum. And my good friend Brandon Morton at Northlake was not only talking about educating, but also how we can do it day to day, all the way down to what we eat for lunch and how do we throw away properly, our trash and what is recyclable, and having the blue bins and the paper bins and things of that nature. Folks, it is everywhere, and we all have a bias. Here's a bias. I need a printer in my office. I just have to have one, right? Other than taking the extra 10 steps to go to the community office printer, it save me in some weight gain, right? But also, we don't all need a printer in our office, right? Unless it's confidential things and things of that nature. Again, we talk about in education settings, what are things that we can do to make sure that at the intersection, bias and sustainability, that we actually have a preference towards sustainable efforts that actually produce, again, address the three-legged stool. I hope that helps understand it. And then discipline, we can drill down deeper as we talk about sustainability in that section, but I won't belabor the point. So now we'll talk about strategies. How do we address implicit bias in sustainability? One is that individual perception, right? The perception is reality. Their stereotypes and their decision-making process. We need to become aware of where people's limitations are and what their awareness is. Where people see, and we say sustainability, they automatically think the green stuff, when it's so much more than that, right? How can we educate them? How can we see where they're at? And Sustainable U is a great opportunity for that. We had a meeting this week with the City of Dallas Planning Department, right? And they're doing some sustainable things in the Ferguson Road Initiative, right? Because there's intersections. And so you'd be amazed where sustainability actually has a place across all different areas. But we want to be aware of that and then educate them. It's not just the green stuff. Engage in opportunities to learn about sustainable issues, right? Sustainable U. There are conferences around sustainability and social justice, sustainability and curriculum, sustainability in the prison pipeline, sustainability in parenting. Like there is literally opportunities to learn about these intersections. So let's be well versed in that. And then let's change the conversation from not just the green stuff to actual sustainable conversations. What it means to be sustainable. Again, if we don't have a planet, we don't have social, we don't have economic, right? Because we won't have a planet to do it on. And so it's all ingrained together. Get to know each other, right? And I'm a firm believer in this as I do my diversity equity trainings, is about relationships and fellowship and learning about each other, learning about backgrounds. So that way we can suspend negative judgments. We can truly address the equity and the economic sustainable questions. Oftentimes we judge and we're biased because we don't understand and we don't know about a person. And we're quick to judge them based on what we can see. And so just because they drive a Prius doesn't mean, anything about them other than the fact that they just drive a Prius. So we need to understand what hybrid means, understand the terminology, and understand people, ask them about their experiences, and be exposed, and then the environment which they came from. Recognize that sustainability is real. It's dynamic, legitimate, and there's more way than one to promote sustainability. It's not just recycling now. As a parent, I'm teaching my children. In my day, it was just, you got to recycle, you got to turn the lights off. Don't use one big ream of paper, right? but it's so much more than that. And so now having those discussions to make sure that my children don't not only value diversity, value inclusion, but also understand what sustainability means in terms for their life, and in terms for what it means for them, not only for having a planet that is healthy, but also having communities that are healthy and that can serve one another and grow for one another. So understand that it is a real deal. It is dynamic, and it's so much more than just reusing that sheet of paper, right? Courageous conversations, or as Georgianne, who I love, deliberative dialogues that we had last year, right? Let's be intentional and have these conversations, and that will address, the perceptions, the stereotypes, and the attitudes, really around sustainability, and that we fully understand. So when we do hear a term about New Green Deal, what does that actually mean, right? What does it mean for me? So I'm well versed in it. So that way I'm not just making assumptions about what it means, and not political conversations, because I don't like political conversations, right? Because there's polarized sides. Logical, knowledgeable, and educated conversations about the issues to where we can dialogue. And if we don't agree, it is okay for us not to agree. We can still be in community and relationship, not political conversations to where we're ranting and raving, but actual dialogue about what does sustainable mean for me? What does it mean for you? And how can we navigate that as we interact that with equity, and inclusion, and diversity? So this pretty much sums up what I'm saying, right? Green is a trend, sustainability is a mindset. In the graphic, I'm a visual learner, right? And it's, if we don't take care of the planet, social justice means nothing without the planet, right? Because we won't have a planet to march on and to protest and to advocate for social change in. Social justice, if we don't talk about environmental racism, we talk about how environment affects the least of our population in poverty a lot more than others, right? Then what good is social justice if we don't address the environment? Economics, right? Economic empowerment, right? Most in poverty, don't understand the conversation about recycling in the environment and things of that nature, because I'm too busy trying to make sure that I can pull myself out of poverty. So it's all intertwined, it's all married together. So green is the trend, right? And that'll pass. But sustainability is a mindset, and that's what we're trying to promote from our office. And that sustainability mindset is also married to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And it's going to be weaved into everything that we do. Working with the Center for Teaching and Learning, right? Working with the academic side and the operations side, HR, and all those areas. And so now, when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, we're not just having that discussion. We're also having a discussion about sustainability, and that, my friends, is how we get social responsible as an organization. And that is how we have the intersection of implicit bias and sustainability. I've talked enough. Any questions, comments, concerns? I'll turn it back over to Georgianne and the team for moderation now.
This is Georgianne, and I have a question. I have noticed lately that sometimes just using the words implicit bias seems to be a trigger for some people. How might we address that or avoid it or
yeah, that's a good question. All right. And you notice I use various terms in my presentation, and those who've heard me before, depending on the audience, I tailor the conversation, right? But implicit bias, privilege, those words have with it power. And so I think it depends on your audience. At the end of the day, I'm of the mindset, whatever word I have to use to get you to understanding, I'm going to use it. And I think that's just the value of being a good educator, right? So for bias, that's why I use my flowers. The great example, I use my flowers, right? I could use the race one where it shows mug shots of minorities versus white individuals. But I'd rather go a different approach and try to use an elementary understanding of just flowers and bugs, because that helps people understand, oh, I am biased. When it's just, oh, I just thought I just didn't like bugs, right? And so I think, being strategic and creative in your terminology based on the audience that you serve. But yes, there's a lot of loaded terms right now. And some of that has come because, terminology has been politicized and weaponized to where when you hear a certain term, automatically you think a certain thing because we've been conditioned to think that way. And so I think I firmly agree that it's you have to be strategic in the terminology that you use based on the audience. And so what I always do is try to know my audience ahead of time, to where I can use terminology where I can get them to understanding, So when I use my bugs and my flowers, that gets them to understand that they are biased. And then I'll come behind that and talk about redlining and housing and talk about, criminal justice system. Then they understand, oh, now I do have bias, how this can perpetuate itself in the different areas of their life. So I hope that answers the question, Georgie.
It did. Thank you.
Questions?
Lori and Andy, do we have any other questions coming up?
Yes, we do. Dr. Chapman, one of our attendees said that she noticed in the news last week that several prisons, women's and men's prisons, were without power or water and didn't really seem to be making any efforts to rectify the situation. Many of us were in this situation as well, but we have more comfortable surroundings and blankets and beds. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so that is troubling, right? And I think oftentimes so in great to Georgianne's point, when we hear prison, there's a connotation, right, that they've done something horribly wrong, and so they deserve, right, to not have power and not have, and that goes against what America is, right? The necessity of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and the basic human needs. And I feel qualified to speak of this. My dad worked in the federal prison system for 30 years. And so that is oftentimes a challenge of making sure that, even though they are have committed an offense in society and are paying their debt to society, there's still a need for basic human decency. But oftentimes they're the last ones, even when you think in terms of COVID, how they're the last ones, for testing and for support and resources in those areas. So I think that's why we need more advocacy for criminal justice reform, not only on the sentencing and the court system side, but also the imprisonment side, right? Again, by all means, I firmly, if you do a crime, you need to pay your debt to society, absolutely. But there should be some safeguards in place to ensure human decency for those that are in those situations. So yeah, I noticed that on the news as well, that there was not a priority. And oftentimes that priority is determined by power in that situation, right? When I think in terms of last week, I had neighbors who sit on the board of CoServe who might have had more access, right, to individuals than others. And I don't know that, but you think in terms of power and privilege and position, it makes a difference. So.
Thank you. We do have one other question, and I think it's probably for both Dr. Chapman and Georgianne. The question is, when the intersection of sustainability and DEI are integrated into Dallas College, what does that look like?
Yeah, so I think my perspective, and I'll let Georgianne chime in here, is really tying the two together now. Not just the green stuff, right? But when we have our conversations, when I do diversity equity presentations, I'm actually talking about sustainability as part of that conversation now, as opposed to just something that Georgianne did, right? And not just something that sat over here that a few campuses did. And so I think it's really having those opportunities, conversations around not only what diversity, equity, inclusion means, but sustainability means for that, and they create opportunities. So now when we go out and we host the North Texas Food Bank, we talk about not just providing food for individuals, but also who are we serving, while we're serving them, and connecting the dots so that it's not just social movement, but also sustainability movement as well. That's my piece. Georgianne, did you have anything to add to that?
I love what you said, Kenneth. And for me, I think that what that looks like is when they're fully integrated is that every time I speak to anyone anywhere now, I am speaking about sustainability, which is 3 pillars: equity, economy, and environment. Because early on, I've been a passionate environmentalist for 30 something years. And at that point, we really weren't able to articulate, or maybe it's not that we weren't able to, we just didn't articulate how a degraded environment would affect the other 2 areas. And what we have learned over the years is that is critically important. And I think it was Dr. Maria Bocalandro who first brought this whole concept of bringing social justice into sustainability when she brought Mustafa Ali to the Cedar Valley Sustainability Summit in 2017. So it's been about 4 years that we always tie the three things together. And I think that helps people understand why it is so important. Because again, used to when people talk about polar bears dying, that wasn't relevant to anybody in Dallas, Texas. It's hot here. What do you mean polar bears are dying? That just doesn't make sense. But now when we talk about climate change and how, in the not too distant future, Dallas is going to have 120-degree days in the summer. I don't know about you, but that terrifies me. And that then also affects our economy, because guess what? When it's 120 degrees, people can't work. Airplanes can't fly, and there's all this other host of things that come along with it. So yeah, it's a big concept, and I think that's what it looks like when we're integrated, is the fact that our messages support one another's 100% of the time, because they are so bound up together.
Great.
Good question. Thank you.
A couple more questions came in. One was asking if where can we find the 17 areas defining sustainability? So maybe we could share that link. And then a question came in. It says, thank you for a great presentation. With the intersection of implicit bias and sustainability, how could we combine or integrate our Dallas College Sustainable Scholars Program with our Dallas College Civil Rights Speaker Series and Tour?
Yeah, that's got to be a North Lake person, because we're working on that. Is that Dr. Vu or Dr. Howard? It's coming. So we're working on that. We got a meeting scheduled. So my goal is to integrate, right? Because they have intersections. And so what I envision is a longer civil rights tour that only talks about the civil rights aspect, but there's some coal plants and renewable energy source plants that we could stop along the way to Alabama and to Georgia, and then integrate. And then even the civil rights aspect and how it relates to sustainability, right? And so that's already in the works. I know who that question came from. Stay tuned.
Thank you, and you called it.
Yeah.
For the individual who asked about the 17 areas, the link was added to the chat. And Dr. Vu says, thank you, Dr. Chapman.
Yeah.
There's another comment that came in privately to me. This person said, I also liked when you showed the trash cans, and when we had the storm services stopped running, I saw how apartment building trash piled up that creates disease. And if we educate more people on the recycling process, the amount of trash would have been lower.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are things that, people don't know what they don't know, right? But it doesn't have to be hard to witness sustainability issues, right? And I think, and forgive me, from my undergrad days, I think it's like the away effect, like we'll run out of space for our trash at some point, right? And so how can we reduce, reuse, recycle? And somebody asked me, because we have a newborn baby girl, and are we using cloth diapers? And I said, oh, no, Lord Jesus, no, we're not. We're using Pampers still. We haven't gone that far yet. But yeah, that's, the conversation, and there's still a movement for cloth diapers for that very reason, but people don't know what they don't know. And so that otherwise on us to be champions for that, not to be vigilantes about it, right? Not to, force feed individuals, but talk about the things that plastic sacks versus paper sacks, right? Things of that nature, right? And there's research that says your bias towards sustainability is based on what type of sack you choose at the grocery store. And so that's how detailed it is. That's how intersectional it is. So that's an excellent point.
There was another question to me privately about when do I get to see the other participants, and this is what's called a WebEx event, and so you won't see it's different from a meeting. If it was a meeting, we would all be able to see each other and talk just like we're in the same room, but this is an event which is one to many people, so we communicate through Q&A and chat. And Kenneth, I'll just say, as green as I am, I tried cloth diapers for 2 weeks, and that was as long as I could make it. So. Right.
Oh no! Listen to me. I believe in sustainability. I'm a champion for it. But I'll just reduce my carton and plastic, and I'll stick with the Pampers. So.
Another question came in. Do you have any comments on the discussion upcoming at the City of Dallas Environment and Sustainability Committee on March 1st regarding the formation of an Environmental Health Commission, either combined with or in addition to the EAS Commission?
I think, and I'm not as well versed in that because I'm not a resident of the City of Dallas, but I am a resident of Frisco. But what I have known about that, I think it needs to. So what I heard about Shingle Mountain and what that was doing. So we do need organizations to take it serious and to have commissions and to have voices for the people. But that's the extent of my knowledge of that particular commission. Georgia, do you know more about that?
Can you say the question again, Andy? Because I think I might know, but I want to make sure before I start talking.
Sure. There's on March 1st, there's a City of Dallas Environment and Sustainability Committee. And they're forming an Environmental Health Commission, either combined with or in addition to the EAS Commission currently.
Okay, yeah, no, I did not know that, but that's very encouraging to hear. And one of our employees, who I already mentioned, Dr. Maria Bocalandro, serves on an advisory committee at the City of Dallas. So I'll ask her about that and see if there's a way that Dallas College can become involved. So I'll say one last time, do we have any more questions?
There was just a comment that came in. Thank you for the presentation. It's going to take us some time to move from the mindset of just green only to understanding the sustainability mindset. So we appreciate this.
Yeah, it's a process, right? Even diversity, equity, inclusion, it's a process. And it takes years, right, to change in the conditions. So again, and what me and Georgie and with social responsibility know, part of our goal, right, is always education, right? But no one is going to become a believer overnight. It's a process. And there's a lot of forgiveness in there because we're learning and we're growing. So absolutely, it doesn't happen overnight. So that's an excellent point. And thank you all for having me and being attentive today.
Well, thank you, Kenneth, for such a wonderful, excellent presentation. We really appreciate you being